So this week, lads, we're going to be reviewing the South Africa versus the might of Portugal. It played in Bloemfontein, I think, off the top of my
Yeah,
head. Yep.
yeah.
Yes.
Sweet. Yes. So played in Bloemfontein. Um, another spectacle of rugby. Portugal. What can we say? They turned up, and I think
Yeah.
that's got to be the main thing moving forward. That we've got to get these teams playing in international rugby. We have to grow
Yeah.
the game. So, guys, starting from the top, what were your thoughts on the game?
I was actually really impressed by Portugal. I thought their attacking intent was brilliant. Their physicality, if you actually look closely, like quite a few of the times they really took it to the South Africans physically, and 7 turnovers to 4, so they won more turnovers than the box. But they won the one area where they lost the physicality is when they tried to take on RG Snam and about 4 of them. But
it ain't going to work.
but I really see a great future for Portugal. Like I think they're going to develop even more, and World Rugby needs to make sure that they carry on playing top tier nations, because the way they performed in the World Cup last year, and they were playing against a South African side that, by all intents and purposes, is just ridiculously rich in depth. So the players that are playing on that side could easily be the starters for the box. So it's but the tries they scored, the intent they had, the physicality they had was really good. So yeah, I was impressed by Portugal.
Yeah, that they play a good brand, don't they? Like in terms of speed, I think with their hands, they're just as quick as they can be. Andres, what
Yeah.
were your thoughts, my brother?
Well, for starters, I'm really familiar with Bloemfontein, having spent a year in the army there. So this time of the year is really cold. It is high above sea level. So the strength and conditioning of the Portuguese team actually really impressed me, because at this time of the year, lungs would have been really burning, and they did not relent for the 80 minutes. Actually, I believe that the All Blacks have not put 21 points on the Springboks at Bloemfontein yet. So Portugal did something there that the All Blacks haven't achieved.
Oh, nice. Because that was one question I thought for you lads is like, what is it like playing at altitude? I've never done it myself. I've played in New Zealand, but I haven't played it up at the high Valders. That's what it's called, isn't it?
Well, I think one of the key things is the ball travels a lot further. So if you're kicking a ball, it goes the full length of the field, which means you've got more field to cover with your legs, and your body just does not feel it doesn't have enough oxygen, because you've got less oxygen at a higher level. So it feels like you're a lot less fit than you actually are at that level. So you tire earlier. So again, Portugal were probably the biggest surprise during the recent Rugby World Cup. I actually thought then I should buy a Portuguese rugby jersey. I will certainly do that to celebrate that team. Yeah, they've also got one of the nicest rugby jerseys around.
The numbers on the back are awesome.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it was just in terms of the spirit of the game, it was absolutely amazing. Absolutely, if people haven't watched it, look up the post-match interview with the Portuguese coach after the game. Just in terms of rugby values, I think a lot of that came through in terms of the players going into each other's change rooms afterwards, having a beer. So that was just great. From the South African side, I mean, not really a great game in terms of established partnerships and patterns, because they had 7 debutants in the game. But yeah, you could see the Springboks wanted to certainly, I don't know, it looks like there's a new trend in rugby in terms of moving the ball through the hands rapidly, because it may just be a Tony Brown influence on the Springboks, but they were clearly trying to move the ball a lot more. And big RG Snyman, when he wasn't auditioning for Golden Gloves, he had some really slick handoffs to other players. I can't recall seeing him actually go to ground with the ball once.
Yeah, I think that's one. You are right there with Tony Brown. He definitely will bring quickness of movement, but he'll also bring, you'll see a heck of a lot of innovation. Like when he was at the Highlanders, and even with Japan, you remember how fast Japan were with their backs and their hands, and it didn't matter who Japan would go up against, that they were in with a chance because their skill level of their backline and forwards were just so high. And you'll start to see that with the South African forwards. You'll see them go from being at their current level to another level again, that scares me. I was very worried when that appointment happened. I was like, oh no, because he is a brilliant attacking mind. But I think Portugal, like they won most of their lineouts. They had 92% on lineouts. They were completing almost as many passes as the South Africans as well. They had 101 to 157 passes. Ball carries not so much though. The post-contact meters were shocking. 500,
that was pretty one-sided. Yes,
504 to 180 meters. But you get that in these games as well. And you remember there that like South Africa's had 100 plus years of rugby coaching, where Portugal might have had 30 or 40 of high level coaching, and I think that's the big difference between the two, isn't it? Like I don't know how many of Portugal's players are professionals actually.
That's actually one of the things that the Portuguese coach mentioned, is that one of their players actually plays in the French fifth league, club league. Yes, so they go from the French fifth club league to international rugby.
That's unreal, eh? That's a huge step up, especially in place of Africa. Far out.
But there was one
of the top 100 clubs in France.
Yeah.
There was one try which was scored by Ben Jason Dixon, and if you watch from the beginning of the phase play to when the try scored, I would love to know how quickly in terms of time it took to get to the try line, because that was fast phase play. Like it was serious, intense phase play, and like running onto the ball with and as you said, post contact meters. But it actually reminded me of like the way Western Province play at like under 18 level. If you watch them, they play with the ball with such pace and such expansive game that you don't even have a time to defend. You're pedaling backwards the whole time.
Yeah.
And that try with Ben Jason Dixon finishing it off, I think is very much sort of, as Andries touched on, the future of where the Boks are developing in terms of their phase play. It's going to be very fast. So yeah, it was very interesting to see that.
Yeah, and I think all of us have played in those games or seen games where you are getting spanked and having to go back to the goal line at every opportunity. So like I've got nothing but big props for Portugal. Like even putting those 21 points on, which is a massive thing.
Yeah.
But only going down by 64, albeit there was a red card. But hopefully he's not going to have too many weeks off.
Yeah, it's these days it's just, and it's unfortunate because if you look at the size of those two players, like Andre Esterhuizen's massive, and the Portuguese guy was a lot shorter. And to get down and you can see he tried to get down, but he still gets head contact. So it's tough. It's really tough. But unfortunately, these rules now, you just cannot go above the shoulder height. And I know he didn't go like in terms of the tackle above the shoulder height, but that contact, sort of lent his head into that area. So it's tough. It's tough for the players, I'd say, to adapt to that.
Yeah, and there doesn't seem to be much sort of much sympathy for those sort of scenarios. They're looking at when players are even falling down, which you can clearly see on the TV that they're falling down.
Yeah.
And then they said, "Nah, that's a red. He's gone." He made no attempt to do it. But in the heat of the moment, you don't think about that. If someone's falling, you go, right. I've got it set. I see where I'm going to hit. I'm going to hit below the ribs. That's where I'm going to tackle. And then they fall. You can't adjust.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think Andre Esterhuizen, it is ironic because I think there was an incident with him and Johnny Sexton previously when he was emerging as a Springbok rugby player, and I think he got a yellow card in that, if I recall correctly. So, it just it seems like he was really unlucky. When you look at his legs were bent at about a 90-degree angle at that contact. So I don't know about you guys, but I really can't run fast with my legs at a 90-degree angle. And so
That's right.
And he is a big, tall, he is a large human being. So if he is going to run into you at near full pace, then the laws of physics do apply. I think it was. I don't think I'll just say it. I don't think that the red card was justified. Absolutely, yellow I get, but red seemed to go too far. That being said, hope the other player is okay. Yeah,
and I think the IRB, this is something they need to look at. Is they need to look at, was it cynical? And I think that's something there where that's a line that has to be in the law. If the tackle had intent and it was cynical, then that is where a red card. That's the benchmark. And I think if it is accidental, then yes, it's a 20-minute red card instead of a full red card. And I think that needs to start being applied because we're going to have big games with a lot on the line. You look at the Rugby World Cup final. I'm still dark on that, lads. With Sam Payne being sent off. And then the same thing happened with Khaleesi, and he got sent off as well, but albeit it was yellow. But it did have a big bearing on the result because the All Blacks had to pay 14 men. And I think that we're going to have another game. It's going to keep happening if they don't sort this out. And it's becoming quite frustrating as a spectacle to watch, even though this isn't like the World Cup rugby final. It's Portugal playing South Africa, for goodness sake. But
standardization. Whatever game's being played, we need the same rules.
That's what gets to you, because the croc roll also.
Yes.
If you look at what we saw last weekend, and then it is agreed. What we need is consistency. We need common sense. And Peter de Villiers, the previous Springbok coach, said that rugby isn't a contact sport. He famously said that ballroom dancing is a contact sport. Rugby is a collision sport.
Yeah, South Africa's Eddie Jones de Villiers, wasn't he? I love him. I used to love him. But right, and as well, they're rewinding back for little things that could have been let go. It's really frustrating.
And I actually think, from the referee's perspective, I think the referee actually had a great game. The TMO coming in, I think, ruined took some of the shine away from an otherwise really competent refereeing performance.
And how good is it to see like a female referee in an international, like a test match, and she was really good. And I actually think we need more female international test referees, because the players, and I know the South African, like the Afrikaans players, they're very respectful towards women. So like they would be like, it'll take away a lot of the talk back to refereeing. I'm telling you.
Yeah,
worried
yes,
about
ma'am. Sorry, ma'am. I'm very sorry.
Yeah. It's a very, very good strategy to keep the Springboks quiet. That's for sure. Yeah, I was actually wondering prior to the game whether she'd be able to keep up with some of these really fast players, because I know as a referee, one of the things you're taught to do is that when a try is scored, what you'd ideally want is basically for that try to be scored at your feet. So yes, and she never seemed out of place. So yeah, absolute credit to her for keeping up with the pace of that game at altitude. That was an incredible refereing performance, actually.
Yeah, and good to see. I think the rugby needs more of that, and I think all sports does actually. They need a little bit more ladies in there. Good attention to detail as well. That's one thing there that I'll give it, and I'll definitely make sure there that the boys are being kept in line. And so in other international games, actually, well, the other thing there, guys, were there any standout performers from the Portuguese that you'd like to take home and put in your team?
I think teams are obviously well prepared, and especially at the beginning of the game, you've got your mind set on how you're going to play the game. So early disruptions can really throw a team. So Dos Santos had to come in really early in the game unexpectedly, and he actually had a storming game, ending up with 2 tries. And yeah, he really looked good. And then a guy, Pinto, the number 14 from Portugal, absolute credit to him, because I think it was Curtly Aronso got a line break and ran the full length of the field, and he caught up with him and dragged him down, I think 5 meters or so from the Portuguese try line. So there aren't many people in rugby that would be able to say that they caught Curtly Aronson from behind. Yeah, so certainly those two stood out.
On the South African side, I think what you're seeing, there's the squad depth developing really well now. Like there's players coming through and they're young. South Africa's squad depth is really good, and it's so good to see Mum Pimpy scoring a hat-trick again. He's just a try-scoring machine. Sasha Feinberg, Ingo Mzulu, that guy needs to start soon. He is brilliant. Like he touches that ball and something happens. I actually think he's now overtaken Manie Lebok in the pecking order. I think Manie is going to struggle now to, I think just his goal kicking, Manie is just not getting his goal kicking right. And he fits brilliantly into the attacking player, but he's got to nail his kicks. And Sasha just nails it, splits the posts every time, and his counter attacking and his feel for the game and his offloading game. I don't know if you see that, like the way he draws in the defenders and puts another player in space is really good.
Hard
and
to
then
defend too.
really, really hard to defend. And then Afelele Fassi at the back had a stormer of a game at fullback. So it's looking like South Africa's squad depth is developing really well after watching that game.
I don't know. It's not often that I would criticize Rassie, but I do wonder if he's missing a trick in terms of Lebok, because I think the only real downside for Lebok is he's kicking at posts, and it seems to be dominating the conversation about him. So if you had a combination, for example, you had Sasha on fullback who could kick at posts because he's on the field in any case. And you could have Manie Lebok run, because I actually still think Manie Lebok, when he has confidence, is better than Sasha is with the ball in hand at the moment. He was cutting up the Portuguese, but I think that's one thing. Just take the kicking out of his mind, and let him play that game. He's kicking out of hands good. But yeah, I think that's just the one thing. Evan Roos, I think, looked like what I'll call an unguided missile. He seemed like he was trying too hard. I think he may have played himself out of an opportunity there, where Evan Roos only had a little bit of an opportunity, but it was only his 4th test. Sorry, I said Elrith Lowe.
Yeah.
Elrith Lowe, it was only his 4th test, which is a bit weird because it seems like he's been in the Springbok setup for a lot longer than 4 tests. And he certainly seemed a lot more settled. And then Lucanio Arm, him and Mapimpi, they famously ran in a try in that 2019 Rugby World Cup, and they just looked calm as a cucumber doing it. It was great to see them back, and Lucanio looked sharp. It was good to see them back.
Now, there's big competition for places now, similar to the All Blacks. Like, that competition for places is good. And just touching on that, if we look at, let's fast forward to the next year, the World Cup, and the planning for the World Cup. What I'm seeing is South Africa planning towards the next World Cup. I'm seeing Razor, although he's starting out, and I'm seeing Andy Farrell doing the same. He's blooding players in with the older players. I'm not seeing that with England. England they've got a good starting team, but their squad depth still needs to be seen. Like, how good is their squad depth? And then obviously look at the other nations like Australia and Wales, Scotland, and France. France we haven't seen yet, but the way their youth system is at the moment, they should have really good squad depth. So
yeah, but they've got some superstars. 5, 6, 7 positions deep. It's really, really worrying. Especially with Dupont to come back from 7s. But yeah, on the other side of it, and cheers lads for summarising the Springboks Portugal game. We're going to go to the Africa Cup. And I've been excited to talk about some other rugby that's not tier 1. It is cool to watch tier 2 nations. It is also cool to watch club rugby. I just want to go around the room firstly. Who's your guys' original club before we go into the Africa Cup?
Well, I mean, if it was my club, I played at Tuckies, but it was Koses, which is the university league, which is still very strong. But in Hong Kong, it was Hong Kong Scottish Rugby Club. Yeah. Nice.
Andres, what was your club, mate? Club of choice?
Pretoria Rugby Club.
Awesome, mate. And I hail from the Porongia Rugby Club. I think now they're nearing their 150th year. So one of the oldest clubs in New Zealand, black and white hoops. And I've got, I think one of my brothers is still playing for them. And so our family's gone through and played since we were, age 5. And now, my one of my other brothers, I've got 3 brothers. So excuse me.
Like the Barretts.
Yeah. Well, if I had 1% of the Barrett talent, I'd be happy. Sadly I was a lock, so I didn't quite have the skill. But with his son, he's bringing his boy through, and he started with the club, so the family generations are still going, which is really cool. So that's one thing there. Hopefully we get to cover some club rugby games down the track. But the Africa Cup, mate, I'm excited. Zimbabwe versus
Uganda.
Whew.
Yeah. So it's very interesting. The Rugby Africa Cup's grown really well now. It's actually a really well organized competition. And you can go watch the highlights on the Rugby Africa page or off YouTube and stuff. So really well organized, and the level of competition is getting higher and higher. But your main teams you're looking at are Namibia number 1. They're the ones that have qualified for the most World Cups, and then we got Zimbabwe, Kenya, Uganda, and then Algeria are starting to play good rugby as
Algeria.
Well. Wow. Yeah, and a lot of their players play in France. And same with a lot of the Francophone African countries like Ivory Coast, Senegal, but Burkina Faso. A lot of them play in France, and then are turning out at the Africa Cup. But it was really good to watch the Zimbabwe-Uganda game, and it's quite interesting the type of the players that they recruited for the Africa Cup. You got Ian Pryor, who plays for the Western Force, although he's just retired, I think. I mean, I don't know where he's going to carry on playing, but then the fullback Tapiwa Mufura has just signed for the Lions in the URC, and he was really good in that game. He sliced through the defense like butter. Blythe Masavere plays for the Sharks in the USC. And then there were some guys that were missing from that side. The rest are some of them play in the Pro D2 in France. I think there's two props, Klepios Kundiana and Victor Mpunga. They play in the Pro D2, which is a good level. And then there were some guys missing, like Farai Mudariki is also in the Pro D2 competition, and then Matt McNabb, who plays in the Championship in the UK, and he's still young. He's 25, 26, but he actually got Championship Player of the Season this year. Wow. So that's like teams like Jersey, London, Scottish, Ealing Trailfinders, which is a good standard. So I probably see him probably moving to a pro team soon. But yeah, it was really good to watch and good standard. Zimbabwe were ahead 22-0 at halftime, but then they just went to sleep. And Uganda clawed back, and they've got a lot of their sevens players in that Ugandan side. And their one guy at the back, struggle to pronounce his name, Wakaracha, I think it is. But he caused a lot of damage from the back. But yeah, Zimbabwe ended up winning 22-20, and they go on to play Namibia on Wednesday, which will be a big game. So I think it's Namibia, Zimbabwe, and then Kenya versus Algeria. And this competition is very important in the context of the World Cup qualifiers, because wherever you end up in this competition will determine your seeding for next year, which is the World Cup qualifiers. So yeah, it's quite interesting. And then Andries, you'll recognize one of the coaches that is involved with Zimbabwe, Gert Small.
Oh yes.
Yeah. So he's in there as a consultant with the guys, helping out. So yeah, it's quite interesting. And then another guy, Jerome Parwater, is this to province? He's the Kenya coach. So there's also interest within the coaching structures getting involved with these African countries. And then obviously Alistair Coetzee is the coach of Namibia.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's becoming quite a good standard, and like I really enjoyed watching it. And then like at halftime, that whole like halftime show, and I mean it wasn't exactly the Super Bowl halftime show, but it was still good to watch. But yeah, it's going to be cool to see on Wednesday what happens in terms of those games. I think Zimbabwe, they need to improve a lot on when they're getting into the opponent's half. They're just not converting possession into points. And then this time, they dominated the Ugandan forwards, but against Namibia, it'll be tough because Namibia have got big boys. But the Zimbabwean backs are really silky. Sorry, there's one guy I missed that's playing actually in the top 14 in France, and his name's TJ Manyangara. So those three aren't with the squad at the moment. TJ Manyangara, Farai Mudariki, and Matt McNabb. So they're still got to be added to that squad probably next year for the qualifiers. So yeah, it's interesting to watch the tier below the tier one type thing, and see like so who's coaching the teams and the level of involvement, and this is where the game's growing, right? And I know there's been talk of allocating Africa with a second slot for the World Cup. Same with Asia. So like a side like Hong Kong would be in the line there to get that slot, and then teams like, well, we've got Namibia, Kenya, Uganda, and Zim, two of those sides potentially going to the World Cup if it gets allowed, which I think it must happen to grow the game.
Yeah, and we're seeing the results of sevens, right? We're seeing how strong that's growing the game, and I think definitely we need to see the same applied to 15s if the game's to survive.
Yeah. Absolutely. And just regular competition, putting these teams into tournaments. Like you look at what Fiji and Drew has done for Fiji rugby. So now, like I've chatted on the podcast before, but Zimbabwe used to be part of the Currie Cup, and so was Namibia. But they need to be playing in these regular tournaments to be improving. So a franchise out of Zimbabwe, like the Drua, for example, to play in a high level competition, and same with Namibia, same with Kenya and Uganda, or Kenya and Uganda, because their neighbors could be one franchise type thing. But there needs to be some out-of-box thinking. I know Hong Kong's looking to create a franchise to be part of the Japanese league. So it's these sort of things that sort of World Rugby needs to look at. Don't just look at the top tier. You need to look at the tiers below, and develop that side of the game.
Just oh, sorry, Andres, you go, mate. No.
Yeah, I had the good fortune. Gert Small was one of my coaches. I think it was his first coaching gig when I played for Tech Gardens in Cape Town, and he was an amazing coach. And he obviously went on later on to be the forwards coach for Ireland, and he's had an amazing career as a coach and an administrator. And what I remember about his coaching style is usually when you get to club rugby in South Africa, the expectation is that you have the skills to play at that level, and basically they focus often on strategy and things like that, fitness and so on. But Gert was very, very focused on making sure every player knew their role, and he was really technically hands-on in terms of skill. That wasn't common in other coaches. So yeah, look out. He has the ability to make a small, mobile backer forwards do things to larger backs.
Yeah. Well, I hope his expertise help against Namibia on Wednesday.
Well, just touching on left field ideas, guys. Like maybe that's what they need, is to look at the audiences and population base in Zimbabwe and Namibia, particularly like for Super Rugby in New Zealand, right? We've got 12 teams and the competition's floundering because we don't have enough sponsors and money coming in. It's selling out stadiums sometimes for the big games, but not so much for the smaller games. And maybe that, if there could be a study involved and look at what the potential would be for a television audience for Namibia and for Zimbabwe, and trying to get them into these bigger competitions. But travel's an issue as well, and players want to make money, but as well there's a bit of pride on the line. And it could be developing a bigger competition, or a world club challenge or something like that, which could really benefit all of them.
Yeah. It's definitely something that they need to look at. How can you professionalize these games at the tier below? It's very important, and a lot of it comes down to grassroots development. If you look at football and how popular that is, and that's because it's such a popular grassroots code. So if you get your grassroots right and you've got the interest in there, that's when the sponsors come in, because there's numbers. So that's big. But yeah, it's like, just speaking from a Zimbabwean context, like it's such a popular game in Zimbabwe. You watch the schoolboy rugby games and stuff, there's big crowds. In between, yesterday I was watching one of the two top sides in Zimbabwe play yesterday, the under 18s of St. John's College versus Peterhouse. And yeah, it was a brilliant game to watch. Big crowd at the game. Good spectacle. Like they were doing a breast cancer awareness, like the St. John's team had pink jerseys, and so the interest is there. It's popular. It just needs that next step to support it, type thing.
Yeah, so come on, sponsors, come on, World Rugby, throw some money in. God, can do it. But cheers, lads. Bloody interesting. Again, always enjoy it, and we'll get this off to Craig, who's in France with his little. I wonder if he's got his little French hat or his little French stick. Next week, let's refer to him as Pierre at the start, and hopefully
he has a beret.
Yeah, and we'll do the laugh with him each time. All right, bloody pleasure, lads.
All right, cheers. Thanks, Jeremy.
Cheers, thank you.
Cheers, Andres.